So, I thought I would do a review of the Aquila Nylgut strings in fifths, which are meant to simulate mandolin tuning. I'm not going to do a side-by-side comparison. I'm not going to make you suffer through my playing for that. There are a number of videos where there are some side-by-side comparisons with the Nylgut versus the steel strings, and I will put a link to one of the better ones underneath this in the comments or in the description. But what I thought I would just talk a little bit about what to do, what not to do, because it can be a little tricky at times. And the first thing I'm going to talk about is making sure you get the right strings. What you want to get are the Aquila soprano ukulele AQU 30U fifths strings. The 30U is the important part, and I'll put that in writing down the description as well, because they make several different strings in fifths tuning, and as far as I know, the soprano one, the 30U, is the only one that's designed for mandolin tuning. They have several others. They have like 2 or 3 others. The most common one is the 31U, which is in fifths, but it's not the right tuning. It's CGDA tuning, as opposed to mandolin tuning, which is GDAE. Some people apparently have gotten the 31Us by mistake, and when they try to tune that A string up to E, of course it snaps because it's just not designed for that. So again, you want to go for the 30U fifths tuning, and it'll say, and that's another thing, look for that, and it'll say it'll say GDAE. Look for that as well. So, so that brings up another issue. It's these, well, a couple other issues. The sets are made for ukulele, so there's only 4 strings. So you'll need to get 2 sets of these soprano uke strings. And they are built for a soprano, which is a pretty short scale. I was a little concerned that the strings might not be long enough for the mandolin. Turns out they're long enough. You don't have a lot of extra, so be careful when you're putting them on there. You know, if I had one string where I goofed up and I had to cut some off, and I just barely got it on there. You know, and the way obviously these outside these strings here, you're going to have less wiggle room. And which brings up another issue which I've seen talked about and nobody's articulated how they do it, is how do you get the strings on to these, because they don't have a loop like a mandolin string would have. And I'm going to insert a picture in here showing how I did it. And essentially what I did is when I took my old mandolin strings off of this guy, I saved the loop part and cut back the string till it was pretty close, but you don't want it too close to that loop because it's just kind of twisted together. It'll come undone. And then I turned those loops backwards so the string was going this way, and tied the Nylgut strings onto those loops. You got to be a little careful. The smaller loops are a little fragile. I had one break on me, and so I had to tie one of the thicker strings onto the actual little tine thing that the loop would go over. And I'm going to put a picture here showing what I did, and that's how you get it on there. Now, for the sake of fairness, I'm not a big fan of Aquila strings for ukulele. I'm just not. I prefer fluorocarbon strings, although they make a really good wound G string. I have been known to take the G string that came off a fluorocarbon set and replace it with Aquila wound G's because they're really good. So obviously it's going to be quieter. Now, that's the main thing. I've got them on a bowl back mandolin, and so it's still fairly loud. The bowl back tends to be a little bit louder because of the shape here. So I don't know if you had a standard, more of a flat back mandolin, if I'm not sure they'd be loud enough. I think these are loud enough for my purposes anyway. And they're not going to sound like steel strings. They're just not. It's not as easy to tell. When you can really tell is when you're finger picking the chords. It's not going to sound that different, but this brings me to my one complaint: the D strings. They're just not convincing. I mean, the E string and the A strings, they could pass. I actually really like the high E. It's nice. It's not, doesn't have that like annoying piercing sound that the steel string E strings have. But I just don't like it. I think what's happening, and here's the difference here with the G. I think what's happening is these strings are so thick and so close together that they're like vibrating against each other, and it just doesn't sound right, and it just doesn't sound, it's not plausible. It's obviously, I know the other nylon strings are not going to sound like steel strings, but that's plausible. That's not right. I'm actually going to, well, I've ordered a couple sets of strings that have a wound C string, and I'm going to try that and see if that fixes what I think is the one flaw in the set. Otherwise, I think they do a pretty good job. And they're easier on your fingers. So if you're new to the mandolin like I am, and you find that you don't really practice that often because your fingers are killing you trying to smash those strings down, if you got this is an old instrument, this neck is pulled up a bit, so the action's pretty high, and it was just it was getting to where I was like, I was thinking about selling it because I just didn't like playing it. But now I'm playing it a lot and enjoying it. So let me see if I list here. Made a list so I get. I think that's the main points that I wanted to get to. My only concern would be that the old loops from the my old mandolin strings are probably not going to last, too long if I keep using those same ones over and over. They're not meant to be used again and again. So I'm going to have to come up with something different. Now I think the G and D strings are thick enough you could probably get away with just tying it onto the hook thingy. The A and E strings is a little different because they're really thin, which brings me up to my other point that I almost forgot. Don't try to string these things all the way up the first time you get them on there. You get them on there, especially these E strings, they're known for breaking. You string them up, get them in the neighborhood. I think the first time I got them one night, I put them on, I strung them up to like A or B. I let them sit overnight. The next day I strung them up to C or D and left it while I went to work, let it stretch out, and then, probably at least a good 24 hours after I put them on and started tightening them up, then I got them up to D, or E, I'm sorry. And they're not going to stay in, they're going to be, because, or be patient, because you're not going to be able to play it for a few days anyway, because these strings are really stretchy. They're unlike most Aquila strings. These have taken a long time to stretch out. It really took almost like 2 weeks before they would stay in tune for any length of time. So take your time. That goes for the A string too, and just take your time. No, don't be in a hurry, because it's not going to matter. Even if you somehow get it to E right away without, the first time without breaking them, it's not going to stay in E for a minute. So be careful. So I really think Aquila's should be commended for this, because a lot of people have had this idea of both using nylon strings on a mandolin and using mandolin tuning on a ukulele, but the E string's always been the trouble, finding a string that could tune up to that without breaking. So I commend them for that. So this is the end of my video. I hope this is helpful if you were thinking about getting these strings. Hope I answered some questions. Thank you. Hello, just a quick update. I'll make this quick. But I did get some wound C strings to put on this. I ended up getting a GHS brand just because they're fairly cheap. It was actually cheap as getting an individual string cost as much as a whole set, so I went ahead and got a set. But it does sound a lot better now. It sounds more like a mandolin, and I'll play some stuff on the C string here. I think that's an improvement. only complaint is these strings, these GHS strings, they're really high tension. A lot more high tension than the Aquila low G. So when I do it again, I'll try a different brand and maybe get it exactly right someday. But for now, I think this solved my one complaint. So to me it sounds more mandolinish, and it's still a lot easier than the metal strings. So this time I am done with this.